look in the mirror, who is it that looks back? Not just the face, not just the body, but the I behind your eyes. The one who remembers, who plans, who wonders, that sense of self that feels so familiar, so constant. What if we told you that your thoughts, your very sense of self, might not be as unified or as conscious as you think? That beneath the surface of your awareness, ancient voices still whisper, guiding your actions in ways you barely perceive. Today, we're exploring a fascinating synthesis of ideas. Julian Jaynes' theory of the bicameral mind, the evolution of consciousness through language, and Carl Jung's archetypes of the unconscious. Together, they offer a radical rethinking of what it means to be human, and just how conscious we really are. So put on your thinking caps and let's begin. In the previous video, we discussed how, in the crucible of catastrophe, earthquakes splitting the heavens, empires crumbling into dust, the gods falling silent, something extraordinary stirred in the mind of humanity. Consciousness. In the ashes of natural disasters and social collapse, it proved to be a decisive advantage for early humans. The bicameral mind, an ancient voice-hearing psyche, was forced to make the historic leap from unconsciousness to consciousness. The divine commands once whispered from the right hemisphere began to fail, and in the silence that followed, something new began to speak. But what was the bridge across that abyss? What was the alchemical key that allowed bicameral man to become conscious? Here, the Pythagorean Illuminati offer a most radical and profound answer. The key that allows for the transition from bicameralism to consciousness. To learn the answer is to undergo an incredible phase transition, not just in theory, but in being itself. This is no trivial insight. It is, in itself, a mutation of mind. Merely recognizing the nature of the key lifts us toward a higher octave of consciousness. And that key is language. Language, the architect of thought, the sacred software of selfhood. It is not just a means of communication, it gives us the ability to conceptualize the world around us. From the world itself and the simplest laws of physics to the people in our lives and the larger social structures we exist in. Through language, we abstract, symbolize, and define. This ability allows us to birth a mental space, a private cosmos that we can populate with these concepts and run simulations of the objective world using these conceptions. Through this inner theater, we can then perform rehearsals of reality and enact the one we expect to have the best results in the physical world. And of course, use the results for our actions to refine the model of reality we carry in our minds. In this way, consciousness becomes a feedback loop between the mind and the physical world, mediated by the infinite generativity of words. If it strikes you as strange that consciousness is the result of sufficiently complex language, look not to the stars, but to the cradle. Observe how consciousness develops in modern humans. Around the age of 1 or 2, infants begin to grasp and produce language, a milestone not merely of speech, but of psyche, which demonstrates a significant milestone in their development. It is no coincidence, then, that this time period is associated with an equally significant milestone in the development of consciousness, the ability to recognize oneself in a mirror, not just as a body, but as a self. This can be understood as the genesis of the ego, the beginning of the development of a sense of identity, the moment the self steps out from the mist. Yet this nascent ego, newly born, is fragile and incomplete. It cannot yet hold time in its grasp. It is typically not sufficiently advanced to form lifelong memories because long-term memory requires a narrativized story to place the I within. Not until the age of 7 or 8, when linguistic capacity becomes rich and recursive enough to sustain a coherent life story, does the mind begin to retain the thread of its own becoming. This is why the vast majority of memories formed before the ages of 7 or 8 are typically forgotten as we reach adulthood. In this way, the mind of a child may be a window into our bicameral roots. Early childhood is an explicit example of how our ancestors may have functioned in fairly complex ways without being truly conscious. Imagine a society composed entirely of children. They are complex, yes, responsive, emotional, social, but have no long-term planning or critical thinking skills, a diminished long-term memory, and a limited capacity to understand the world around them or their place in it. Not fully conscious in the reflective, autobiographical sense. The child navigates the world with magical thinking, monsters in every closet, speaking to imaginary friends. They navigate their world with intention and drift through days without a firm anchor in selfhood. Sounds a bit like how early humans would frequently explain life and the world using magical thinking, seeing the world around them in an extremely anthropomorphized manner, doesn't it? So in attempting to grasp how different the mind of a bicameral human is from that of modern people, considering the mind of a 5-year-old might be a good place to start. As we continue to grow and mature, our brains develop in tandem with an increasing capacity to use language. This is not merely vocabulary acquisition. It is the scaffolding upon which our entire sense of reality is constructed. Language is, in fact, one of the most critical pieces of what causes humans to develop the characteristics we now associate with adulthood. And when that language is denied, consciousness withers on the vine. As true connoisseurs in the art of the mind, the AC authors have served up this point. If a person grew up on a desert island with no interaction with any other human, they would not develop consciousness. Consider the haunting tales of feral children such as Oksana Malaya, Ruchampi Ing, John Sesabunya, and Dina Sanichar. Each was raised in isolation from human speech and culture, each tragically struggling to live among us, not because they lack intelligence, but because the cognitive infrastructure for consciousness itself was never formed. These are not simply cases of developmental delay, they're glimpses into an alternative path not taken. Their mental worlds are alien, untouched by the syntax of self. The Pythagorean Illuminati assert that consciousness was always fated to emerge. It was teleologically written into the destiny of mind itself. But why? In the Ontological Self, Dr. Cody Newman said, "Consciousness is an evolutionary activity of mind. Mind, by its nature, is a striving, teleological entity aiming to optimize itself, to have the optimal experiences, the optimal power. To optimize itself, mind needs a way to organize its thoughts, to structure its thoughts, to create a framework for planning, for working out how to advance its interests in the most effective way. It must therefore become self-aware, self-reflective, self-referential. How does it accomplish that? It needs a tool that allows it to refer to itself, to label all of its actions and the world around it. What it needs is a narrative language by which it can tell a story about itself and fit everything into this story. It's critical to understand that reality has its own innate language, namely ontological mathematics itself. But this is predominantly a numerical, quantitative, syntactic language supporting analytic logic. It is limited as an experiential, qualitative, semantic language supporting narrative logic. Look at how much people struggle with mathematics, yet how easily they cope with stories. They hate difficult mathematics and love compelling narratives. Math makes them groan. Stories get their juices flowing. Consciousness is not something that people inherently possess. It's not some inbuilt thing. Instead, it's an acquired skill, a learned ability to perform a certain type of activity, namely to operate with language on both the physical space and the consciousness space itself. What does language do? It names every type of object and action in the physical space. It names inferred objects, such as God and the soul, and their inferred actions. Consciousness models the physical world and also the metaphysical world in words, in language, and can then manipulate this model as much as it likes to make plans and to understand reality. The model of reality is separate from reality, so we can do whatever we like with the model without interfering with reality, until we consciously will an action, at which point one of our conscious thoughts or plans is executed in the real world and becomes part of physical reality. Let's now make an important distinction, one too often blurred in the haze of New Age mysticism. Consciousness is not sentience. To be sentient is to feel, to perceive, to suffer, to enjoy. It is to have an inner theater of sensation where the lights of pain and pleasure flicker across the screen. Sentience encompasses the faculties of feeling, sensing, and intuition. A dog feels warmth, fear, affection. A deer startles at the snap of a twig. These animals are generally considered sentient as they can feel pain and have other sensory perceptions. But they do not have the ability to reflect on these sensations or conceptualize them. They do not tell stories about themselves. They do not name the world they inhabit. Humans, in contrast, possess both consciousness and sentience. Consciousness is that rare gift and burden of being aware of one's awareness, of narrating it, reflecting on it, and abstracting it. It is not simply to suffer or enjoy, but to ask why one suffers, why one rejoices, and what it all means. This is a higher cognitive function that requires a conceptual framework to process experiences. And here lies the pivot, the great evolutionary leap, the transition from sentience to consciousness, from feeling to thinking about feeling. This brings us to the crux of our inquiry. How did early bicameral humans, those guided by divine hallucinations and neural command voices, make the leap transitioning to consciousness? In our previous episode, we explored the environmental context in which the breakdown of the bicameral mind occurred, namely, ecological and sociological disaster. When the voices of the gods began to fail, a new mode of mind was demanded. But beyond these external conditions, what were the human factors that could have catalyzed the transformation? This is one of the greatest mysteries in human history, but it is largely overlooked by the mainstream. The AC authors, on the other hand, have investigated several theories of how the first human language was created. One of their hypotheses hinges on the remarkable neurological condition known as synesthesia. Wikipedia says, synesthesia is a perceptual phenomenon in which stimulation of one sensory or cognitive pathway leads to involuntary experiences in a second sensory or cognitive pathway. For instance, people with synesthesia may experience colors when listening to music, see shapes when smelling certain scents, or perceive tastes when looking at words. People who report a lifelong history of such experiences are known as synesthetes. Was there once a particular tribal leader, a proto-shaman, whose synesthetic brain blurred sound and sight, who began to hear certain noises in association with objects in the world? Perhaps this leader began to vocalize the noises while pointing at those objects, linking the outer and inner realms through sound. In doing so, they might have unknowingly forged the first bridge between perception and language, thereby teaching other members of the tribe to associate objects with sounds. Could mirror neurons have played a critical role in the tribe's ability to learn these words? These neurons, which fire both when an individual acts and when they observe another performing the same action, may have enabled early humans to imitate and internalize the sound-object associations being demonstrated. It's worth noting that some primates, such as chimpanzees, are known to make certain vocalizations to signal threats like snakes, predators, or rival troops. But despite this, they've never developed complex language. This fact may imply that early humans had one critical advantage: the capacity to generalize, to move beyond a narrow range of instinctual sounds and systematically assign vocal sounds to an expanding range of phenomena, and perhaps, more importantly, to teach this capacity to others. Through repetition, ritual, and shared symbolic play, this seed of language could be nurtured into something truly novel, a generationally transmitted system of meaning. Culture, in other words. But as this revolutionary tool of language unfolded, it did not annihilate the past. It built upon it. It's important to understand that as humans developed consciousness, the bicameral mind was not replaced. Consciousness was simply layered over it. Evolution, after all, is not in the business of clean slates. It rarely deletes, it overlays. Old structures remain embedded, sometimes dormant, sometimes active, influencing the new. The human brain itself is a testament to this principle. Consider the triune brain model when explaining how consciousness can sit on top of bicameralism. At the base is the reptilian brain, responsible for primitive survival functions. Layered atop it is the limbic system, the seat of emotion, memory, and social bonding. And crowning this architecture is the neocortex, our most recent evolutionary achievement, where rational thinking, language, and consciousness reside. Thus, our conscious mind stands not alone, but precariously atop an ancient neural strata. We are, in a sense, modern symphonies played on ancient instruments, our reason threaded through the echoes of instincts and voices long past. The idea that consciousness can simply be a layer of cognition over bicameralism has profound implications, especially when viewed through the lens of Jungian psychology. It suggests that even in the modern mind, unconscious systems continue to exert influence, echoing ancient modes of being. Carl Jung first used the term archetypes in 1919. Jungian archetypes are universally recognized mental patterns, primordial images etched into the human psyche, recognizable across cultures and epochs. Jung proposed these as a direct refutation of John Locke's tabula rasa theory, the notion that people are born into a blank mental state. Far from blank, Jung argued the human psyche arrives already equipped with deep structures, psychic blueprints that shape our perceptions, dreams, behaviors, and fears. In Jung's model, the human mind is far more complex than the consciousness humans generally identify with. Among the most well-known Jungian archetypes are the ego, the conscious part of us where we derive our sense of identity from, that which is typically referred to as I. The persona, the mask we wear when interacting with other people, is considered the character you play when you are not around strangers, compared to how you behave in the company of close friends. The latter is likely to be much closer to your ego. The shadow, the repressed parts of ourselves, instincts, desires, or traits we've learned to reject as unacceptable, what we hide from others, and often from ourselves. The anima, animus, our inner contrasexual image, the idealized mental model of the other, typically projected onto those we're intimately attracted to. The mana personality, the conception we have of a powerful personality, the wise elder, the leader, the hero, the sage, etc. The self, the culmination of the psyche encompassing both conscious and unconscious. It is the central archetype, the God image within. Jung also introduced the concept of complexes, emotionally charged constellations of thoughts, memories, desires, and associations typically centered around particular archetypes. Complexes are forged through personal experiences, especially formative ones during childhood, and act as a sort of psychic structure that can influence one's personality, behavior, and relationships without our awareness. They can be positive or negative. When a complex is activated, it can trigger strong emotional reactions and unconscious patterns of behavior, often leading to repetitive and potentially problematic actions. For example, a person with a strong shadow complex may repeatedly sabotage relationships, driven by unconscious guilt, shame, or anger. Or someone with an anima complex might idealize romantic partners to the point of blindness, projecting inner needs rather than seeing the person clearly. These complexes are not inherently negative. They are psychic organs, part of the mind's ecosystem, but when they operate unconsciously, they can generate internal conflict, neurosis, or destructive loops. In essence, complexes are specific psychological manifestations of archetypes, dynamic personal echoes of universal forms. They show us that while consciousness may believe it's the master of the realm, it's often merely a guest, arriving late to the conversation, unaware of the ancient voices still speaking beneath its floorboards. In this system, consciousness does not stand alone. It is just the tip of a vast psychic iceberg. Beneath it lies the unconscious, intrinsically layered and intricate. It includes the preconscious, containing all that we are aware of and know but are not currently consciousness of. The personal unconscious, which houses our complexes, repressed memories, and shadow material. Everything we've forgotten, ignored, or have yet to fully integrate. And most profoundly, the collective unconscious, the universal substrate of mind, the inherited reservoir of archetypes, patterns, and potentialities that shape our perception before we're even aware of it. But this collective unconscious is not a monolith. It contains strata, depths upon depths that mirror the evolutionary journey of life itself. We can refine our understanding of the collective unconscious by analyzing its various levels. The human collective unconscious, which contains the archetypes, co-evolved alongside humanity, figures like the hero, the wise old man, and the trickster. The mammalian collective unconscious, which contains common themes across all mammals and includes templates of care, aggression, and social bonding, and so on. The collective unconscious of the phylum Chordata, stretching even deeper, encompassing all animals with backbones, including reptiles and mammals, rooted in the archetypes of primal survival instincts, feeding, fighting, fleeing, and fucking. Dr. Thomas Stark writes, the collective unconscious can be equated to the ancient idea of the world soul. We might also view it in terms of the 6 levels of Neoplatonism. Number 1, the One. Number 2, the Nous. Number 3, the higher psyche. Number 4, the lower psyche. Number 5, nature, the world where the lower psyche and matter interact. And number 6, matter. The lowest archetypes are those, the psychoid ones, that deal with matter, and then we progress upwards. There are archetypes for every level. Most of humanity is stuck at level 5, nature. We need to level up to the lower psyche, the higher psyche, and then the nous, where we come in striking distance of the One itself, ultimate divinity. What is the physical world? It is merely the visible, empirical representation of the collective unconscious. It is the lowest archetypal level, machine-like and material, passive and inert, lacking active life and mind, lacking purpose. It is the physical collective unconscious. The higher archetypes belong to the mental world and are unobservable. They are detectable by extrasensory intuition rather than the physical senses. The consequence of this system is staggering. We are influenced, shaped, moved, and sometimes possessed by unconscious forces we don't even know exist. And that's the point. They're unconscious. As Mike Hockney discusses in Organic Intelligence, it's crucial to understand that our unconscious is not a thing. Rather, it's a cast of characters, a range of personalities. It's a living, dynamic organism operating through entities, complexes. We are not one mind, but many. Consciousness is the narrator, but the script has been written and continues to be edited by voices that dwell in the deep. If we merge Jung's archetypes with the Illuminist understanding that consciousness is the product of advanced language skills and Julian Jaynes' theory of bicameralism, we begin to arrive at a higher synthesis of these profound ideas. As Jung suggested, animal instincts are not merely physical patterns expressed through behavior. They also have corresponding mental archetypes that serve as the precursors to their physical manifestation. These are not learned through experience, but are inherited psychic structures that guide behavior from beneath awareness. If we follow this line of thinking to its logical conclusion, we can theorize that the bicameral voices of the gods were, in fact, manifestations of complexes and/or archetypal forces emerging from the collective unconscious. Harry Knox described the nature of these voices by saying, "The unconscious deals in A, the wordless mathematical language, and B, in wordless symbols, signs, icons, images, and feelings, as in dreams. Words ultimately define consciousness because words, and how they are arranged, allow the construction and linking of concepts in a way that is tied to our emotions, desires, and will." To help demonstrate this point and make this idea more vivid, let's turn to a familiar scene from modern storytelling, the horror movie. Picture the classic moment. Our protagonist is being pursued by a psychotic killer. They've slipped momentarily out of sight of the killer and are now hiding alone in a dimly lit garage. The background music fades. Silence descends. We focus on their breath, the tension, the dread. They peer into the night, unsure if they are alone. A chill goes down their spine. Then they feel it. That inexplicable sensation, that creeping sense that they are being watched. And then crash, the killer bursts through the door behind them, triggering our protagonist to run, and we're left with a sudden uncontrollable urge to leap from our seat and escape just as they must. Even if you knew it was coming, the jump scare still gets you. Your body jolts, your pulse spikes, you run. Maybe not physically, but psychically. This reaction isn't the product of reason. It's the eruption of a deep, universal human instinct, fight or flight archetype. No auditory hallucination tells you to flee. You just know. It's unconscious, archetypal. Now imagine that same scene, not as we experience it, but through the eyes of a bicameral human. For them, there was no symbolic fear, no gut feeling. There was no distance between impulse and action. The command to flee would not arise metaphorically. It would be experienced as a literal voice. The God within would speak, "Run!" not as intuition, but as an auditory hallucination. In the absence of consciousness, archetypal commands from the unconscious emerged as divine instruction, immediate, vivid, and unquestionable. What we experience as a nameless impulse, they experienced as law from Olympus. Returning now to the Illuminist stance that consciousness is a layer of cognition mediated by language that sits on top of bicameralism, how might everything we've just explored reshape our understanding of the human psyche? While modern humans no longer hear the literal voices of the collective unconscious, those archetypes and complexes rising from the depths, they've not vanished. Far from it. They form in our personal unconscious and still exert an immense and largely unmeasurable influence over our thoughts, behaviors, and identities. The very nature of consciousness prevents it from detecting what lies outside its spotlight. It is actually impossible to know how completely we are surrounded by the unconscious. Just like if you place an illuminated flashlight in a dark room and ask it to look around, it would falsely report there is no darkness. So too, consciousness cannot detect the unconscious. So we must ask the uncomfortable question: how conscious are humans really? For those with the eyes to see, the answer can be unsettling. Humanity, by and large, remains profoundly bicameral, still influenced, even ruled, by unconscious forces. A staggering number of people today possess no more reflective self-awareness than the average human of thousands of years ago. They are not truly authors of their thoughts, but characters reading from scripts written by archetypes and complexes. And as we've seen, based on our above schema, it is possible for archetypes to hijack the conscious mind via complexes, subverting the will, directing behavior, and leaving the conscious mind to retroactively rationalize how it was in control the entire time. In such moments, consciousness isn't the actor, it is the narrator, catching up to events it didn't initiate. This is why the Jungian process of individuation is so vital. It is the journey of confronting the unconscious, recognizing its role in our lives, and integrating its contents into the light of awareness. It is a process of reclaiming authorship. Much more can be said about individuation, but we'll save that for another time. For now, let's close with one final reflection. If consciousness is not genetically predetermined, if it is not bestowed but built, shaped by language, education, and culture, then the future belongs not to those who wait, but to those who will. Language gave rise to the self. Myth carved order from the abyss. And now we stand at the edge of another metamorphosis, one that demands we become more than passive minds echoing ancient scripts. We must become authors of the psyche, the engineers of meaning. This realization offers us not just insight, but power, because it means we are responsible for ourselves, for each other, for the very evolution of awareness on this planet. We can shape the conditions that shape minds. We can create societies that elevate minds rather than manufacture obedience. We can build cultures that cultivate awareness rather than anesthetize it. The question is no longer whether we are ruled by unconscious forces. We are. The question is, will we integrate them, or will we be enslaved by them? Will we allow our minds to remain colonized by archetypes we've never questioned, driven by forces we can't even hear? Or will we undertake the new alchemy of becoming, of forging a self beyond fear, beyond dogma, beyond the default. This is the great work, and it is the path of the Grail Knights. A civilization where gods no longer whisper in darkness, but speak through enlightened minds. A society where myth is not forgotten, but synthesized, consciously rewoven, and reborn. If you feel the call, you are already part of it. We're not here to relive the past. We're here to redeem it, to complete what's been left unfinished. And perhaps, if we dare, we'll become not just an illuminated society, but a soul sanctum, a God factory. Until next time, dream wisely, friends.
If you enjoyed this video, like it, leave a comment, and subscribe for more. Also, be sure to check out our link tree in the description to discover more and connect with us. You can also visit illumination.nexus or visit reddit.com/r/thegrailsearch and speak with us there. Thank you for watching.